Okay, so now that we've graphed quadratics, the whole idea here is we want to be able to solve them. So there are definite ways to solve these without graphing, but at first we want to talk about solving them with the graph. So remember that quadratic function is when we have y equals. Well, if I'm trying to solve it, that always means we're going to set it equal to 0. And so when you solve any equation, when you're talking about the solutions, we call those the roots of the equation or the zeros of the equation. Those are kind of the same thing. So roots are the solutions of a quadratic equation. Zeros are the x-intercepts of the graph. You need to know that roots, zeros, solutions, and x-intercepts are kind of all interchangeable, and that's kind of some vocabulary that you need to know. So it says solve by graphing x squared plus 6x plus 8. If you can find the vertex of this, there's nothing stretching or shrinking this, so we could use our 1-3-5 rule. So you need to know the vertex starts with negative b over 2a. So that would be negative 6 over 2 times a here would be 1. So that would be negative 3. So my vertex, I have to plug negative 3 back in there to get that y value. So that's going to be, you can use your calculator, but be careful. Negative 3 squared is 9. 6 times negative 3 is negative 18 plus 8. So 17 minus 18, I think that's negative 1. So for me, the vertex is kind of the key point there. So if I can get negative 3, negative 1, that is the center of my graph. So then I'm just going to go over 1, up 1, right? And then it goes 1, 3, 5. So if I go over 1, it goes up 3. If I go over 1, it would go up 5. That's how, remember that we talked about, like every quadratic equation that's not stretched or shrunk any will go up by that pattern. We also could have looked at the y-intercept as 8. So when we flip it over, we get that. If we're trying to find the solutions of this, I'm looking for where it crosses the x-axis. And so I get that there's two solutions here at negative 2 and also at negative 4 are the solutions to that. Think about how many ways a quadratic can cross the x-axis to find the solutions. And here is the one that we see a lot when there's two solutions. We get two real numbers. Sometimes we'd only get one solution, right? That would be if the vertex is on the x-axis. We call that a double root or a repeated 0, right? Like it counts 2 times. And then sometimes we get where it never crosses the x-axis. That's no real solution, and we're going to talk about that a lot more than you did in Algebra 1 this year. So let's look at another one. Solve by graphing. The first thing that I'm going to do if I'm going to find the vertex is I have to have it in standard form, which means that I have to have it equal to 0. So I need to add this 4 over to the other side. And then just like before, I'm going to find my vertex. So I'm going to do negative b over 2a. B is already negative, so be really careful. That's going to become positive 4 over 2 times 1, or that's just, I believe, going to be positive 2. And when I plug 2 back in to here or here, it's kind of up to you. I'm going to do it to this one. I would get 4 minus 8 plus 4. And that does give me 0 as my vertex. So my vertex is at 2, 0. Again, there's no multiplied number in front of the x squared, so it's not stretched any. So I know I could just go over 1, up 1. I could also use my y-intercept of 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Flip it over, but that is 3 apart. So on this one, if I said solve this, it's really just x equals 2. The same number twice, right? X equals 2. And then what about if it doesn't cross at a nice point? And so it says if exact roots cannot be found, state the two integers that it can be found between. And then eventually we'll talk about finding the exact answers. So what about this one? The negative tells me it's opening down, right? But I can still start with my vertex, which is negative b over 2a. So that would be negative 4 over 2 times negative 1. Negative 4 over negative 2 is positive 2. Be really careful when you're plugging this in your calculator because the negative is outside of the x squared. So it's really 2 squared and then negative. So just be careful typing that in your calculator. That should be -4 plus 8 minus 1, which I think would be 3. 8 minus 5. So my vertex is at 2, 3. My y-intercept is at -1, right? So if you wanted to just go like this, flip it over this way. Oh, I changed colors. I like the 1, 3, 5 rule, where I would go over 1 like this, right? And then over 1, down 3. Kind of gives me a better way to draw my graph. But looking at this, that doesn't cross at a nice point, right? Like right here and right here. I don't know what that is, so I have to just give an estimate right now. So I'm going to say x is between what two whole numbers? Well, it's between 0 and 1. Is 1 0? And then the other one is between 1, 2, 3, and 4. And eventually in this chapter, we'll get into finding exact answers. And I think that's all I have. Yes? Yes.